It's one of the quietest mysteries in our deep past. How a species without language as we know it, without art, and without grand monuments, still managed to leave footprints across 3 continents, cross oceans, tame fire, and set the very blueprint for being human. How did a species that sounds so rudimentary actually manage to survive for almost as long as Homo habilis, Homo heidelbergensis, Homo neanderthalensis, and Homo sapiens combined? Long before we dreamt under starlight or painted our fears and hopes on the walls of caves, another kind of human had already rewritten the rules of survival, pushing the boundaries of the known world far beyond its African cradle. Yet, their story almost slipped away, like footprints lost to wind and time. Who were they, and how did they shape a future they would never live to see? Today, we follow the faint echoes of Homo erectus, the humans who did everything first. Around 2 million years ago, Africa was not the continent we know today but a land in flux, a slow-motion collision of ecosystems and climate. The ancient tropical forests that had once blanketed much of the landscape were shrinking, retreating toward the heart of the continent, and in their place spread open savannas, golden and dry, broken only by thorny trees, and wandering rivers that shifted with the rains. The climate itself was growing more unpredictable, with wet seasons coming and going with little warning, droughts lingering longer, water holes vanishing, and herds of antelope and elephants chasing fading grasslands across endless distances. It was not a world built for certainty but for movement. In this world, the old ways of life, such as clinging to trees and gathering close to forest edges, began to fail. By this time, Australopithecus afarensis was already gone, fading from the fossil record nearly 1 million years earlier, and Australopithecus africanus was in decline, unable to adjust to the opening plains. Even Homo habilis, the first hesitant toolmaker, still depended on forests to survive, forests that were vanishing from beneath his feet. In a landscape that demanded speed, stamina, and adaptation, clever hands alone were no longer enough. Something new had to emerge. The fossils tell us when the change began. In South Africa, at a site called Dromolen, researchers uncovered the partial skull of a young hominin known as DNH143, dated to about 2.4 million years ago. Meanwhile, along the shores of an ancient lake in northern Kenya, at a place now called Kubifora, other remains appeared, just slightly younger. Further west, in the layers of Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, new bones surfaced from hominins taller, leaner, with stronger legs and larger brains than anything seen before. Almost at once, this new species seemed to rise across the continent and then, astonishingly, began to leave it. Not long after their first appearance in Africa, traces of them showed up far to the north in the foothills of the Caucasus Mountains, at a place called Dmanisi in modern-day Georgia. By around 1.8 million years ago, Homo erectus had already made it there, and within a few 100,000 years more, their bones would surface in distant Java, an island separated from mainland Asia, even during the lowest sea levels of the Ice Age. This was not slow drift, but purposeful movement. A human species that, faced with change, did not retreat. They moved, explored, and adapted. Where forests fell, they crossed the savannas. Where rivers dried, they followed the clouds. And where prey fled across the heat of the day, they learned to outlast them under a burning sun. They were not specialists tied to one habitat, but generalists armed with flexibility. The most dangerous weapon evolution had yet forged. Homo erectus was not just another hominin fighting to hold on to a dying world. They were the beginning of something new, a species that did not fear change, but chased it. At first glance, they looked almost human, but not quite. Homo erectus was something new, something different from everything that had come before. Their bodies were not built for climbing trees or darting through the undergrowth, but for one thing: movement. They stood taller than any hominin before them, with some individuals reaching nearly 6 feet. Their frames were lean, their muscles roped tight over narrow hips and long, powerful legs, and their arms were shorter than their legs, a clear sign that climbing had become secondary. Their feet told the real story. The fossilized footprints left behind at places like Illirit, Kenya, around 1.5 million years ago, show something remarkable: arches, aligned big toes, and short toes designed for forward propulsion, creating feet made not for grasping branches, but for striding across open ground. Where earlier hominins still balanced between the trees and the earth, Homo erectus had made their choice, fully committing to life on two legs, not just walking, but running. Their entire anatomy was optimized for endurance. They developed a spring, like Achilles' tendon, able to store and release energy with each step, and their relatively thin, elongated body minimized heat retention, while a modern-like network of sweat glands kept them cool under the brutal equatorial sun. Their shoulders, freed from the demands of climbing, could now rotate with ease, perfect for throwing, for hurling a stone or a spear at fleeing prey. They were not sprinters, but persistence hunters, chasing animals across endless savanna hour after hour until their prey collapsed from heat exhaustion. In a world where bursts of speed could win a chase, but endurance could win a life, Homo erectus chose the long game. They were the first true long-distance runners. Inside their skulls, another kind of evolution was unfolding. The early populations carried brains between 600 and 800 cubic centimeters, larger than Homo habilis, while later groups, especially those that reached East Asia, edged closer to 1,000 or even 100 cubic centimeters, pushing against the lower border of human intelligence. But it was not just about size, it was about shape. The frontal lobes, the regions tied to planning, decision making, and perhaps even rudimentary social bonds, were expanding. Although not as developed as ours, these brains were no longer dominated purely by instinct and reaction. For the first time, a human brain was beginning to think ahead, to imagine tomorrow. Their faces, though, still carried the echoes of a deeper past. Heavy brow ridges jutted over their eyes like permanent stone shelves. Their foreheads sloped back sharply, and their skulls stretched long and low, the bones themselves thick and built for durability, not delicacy. Where modern humans have a soft, protruding chin, Homo erectus had none. Their jaws ended bluntly, their mouths set for chewing tough, raw foods. Yet, there were hints of something familiar. Their teeth had shrunk, becoming smaller and more human-like. Their noses projected forward, better suited for breathing dry air during long pursuits, and their cheeks flattened. If you stood on the edge of a dried river and saw one of them moving across the plain at sunset, silhouetted against the dying light, fire in their hand and the hunt in their eyes, you might hesitate for just a heartbeat. You might wonder, is that one of us? Or something older, something harder, something still learning what it meant to be human? Around 1.7 million years ago, something changed in the dust of East Africa. At Kokosili, along the edge of an ancient river, archaeologists uncovered a handful of stones, not shattered by accident or crudely bashed apart, but shaped and planned. They were not the first tools ever made. For hundreds of thousands of years before, early humans had used what we now call the Oldowan toolkit, simple flake struck from larger rocks, sharp enough for a few quick cuts before being discarded. They were useful but disposable, tools for the moment and nothing more. But at Kokosili, something else had taken shape. The stones there had been flaked on both sides, bifacially. With edges carefully worked to a purposeful symmetry, they were not just sharp, but standardized. Each blow was not random, but part of a plan held in the mind before the first strike was ever made. This was the dawn of the Acheulean tradition. The Acheulean was not just a prettier way of breaking stone. It was a revolution in thought and survival. To make an Oldowan flake, one needed only impulse, but to make an Acheulean tool required imagination, the ability to picture a finished tool hidden within the raw stone, and the discipline to bring it out, flake by careful flake. It hinted at something astonishing: foresight, planning, and sequencing. The mental architecture needed not just to react to the world but to shape it in advance. Practically, Acheulean tools changed everything. Oldowan flakes dulled quickly, shattered, snapped, and demanded constant replacement, whereas Acheulean hand axes could be sharpened and reused over and over again. Their thicker, more robust edges made them tougher against hard bones and heavy work. One hand axe could skin an antelope, butcher it to the bone, dig for roots, slice down saplings, and even defend against predators. It was, for its time, a strong, efficient, and reliable portable survival kit. In a world where energy meant life, this mattered. With sharper tools, Homo erectus could strip more meat from carcasses, crack thick bones to reach the fatty marrow inside, and dig for buried plants too tough for other species to reach, accessing food sources that would have been off limits to their ancestors. More energy meant more survival, and more survival meant more movement. While their hands shaped stone, their minds were beginning to tame an even older force of fire. By around 1 million years ago, deep inside the darkness of Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, the blackened bones and ash layers tell a different kind of story. Here, in the dirt pressed by 1 million years of passing seasons, is evidence that Homo erectus did not just find fire, but kept it. Maybe they could not yet spark flame from scratch, but when lightning struck dry grass or ember smoldered after a brush fire, they could capture it, feed it, and protect it. With fire, the nights transformed. Meat, once tough and sinewy, softened over the flames, making more calories available for the growing brain and reducing the need for powerful jaw muscles. Roots and tubers, once toxic, turned edible. Predators shrank back from the light, and the cold fear of the night gave way to warmth and security. Around the fire, days could stretch longer into the night, knowledge could pass more easily between generations, and something like culture, something lasting, could begin to flicker. Fire profoundly changed the game of survival, giving Homo erectus more food sources, greater security against predators, and more time by the fire to exchange ideas and communicate. Homo erectus did not invent survival, for it had been there since the dawn of life, but they were indeed the first to turn it into a strategy, one flake, one flame, one long journey at a time. Thus, Homo erectus reclaimed very precious resources, time, and energy. These resources would be used to undertake the greatest journey any hominin had ever taken in humanity's history, as Homo erectus left the comfort of his close environment and headed into the unknown, stepping out of the forest's shadows to begin shaping the world itself. And so they moved. At first it was north around 1.85 million years ago, in what is now Dmanisi, Georgia. The bones of Homo erectus appear small-bodied, sharp-eyed individuals, tools clutched in hand, standing on the threshold of a new world. They followed herds of antelope and elephants across widening savannas, crossed rivers that carved deep valleys into the land, and threaded through forests and high plateaus, pushing beyond the familiar with each passing generation. And they did not stop. By 1.6 million years ago, they had reached northern China, leaving their mark in places like Gongwangling and Lanshan. By at least 1.5 million years ago, they were established across Southeast Asia, from the ancient lowlands of Sangguran to the river valleys of Java. They had crossed whole continents, climbed mountain ranges, skirted deserts, and forded rivers swollen by the rains. Even more unbelievably for a species we previously thought so primitive, they sailed across seas. The fossils found on Java tell a story stranger than migration alone. Even during the ice ages, when sea levels fell by hundreds of meters, deep channels like the Makassar Strait and the Lombok Strait kept Java and the other islands isolated from mainland Asia, meaning that no simple land bridge ever connected them. No footpath waded across the tides. It was supposedly a world out of reach for them, yet Homo erectus made it. Whether clinging to storm-driven debris, lashing together makeshift rafts of driftwood and vines, or simply pushing out into the unknown without knowing if they could ever return, they crossed. This was no accident, and later evidence only deepens the mystery. On the island of Flores, farther east, another population clearly descended from Homo erectus would appear by around 100,000 years ago, long after sea levels had dropped to their lowest. Even then, crossing to Flores required navigating at least 19 kilometers of open water. They managed to sail in numbers significant enough for a population to establish itself free of inbreeding, and evolved there for tens of thousands of years. Instinct, curiosity, or desperation within them had already broken one of evolution's oldest barriers. They were no longer creatures confined by the shape of the land, but had become sailors of rivers and seas, even if their vessels were rough and their voyages blind. They were the first humans to chase a horizon they could not see beyond and go anyway. For much of the 20th century, Dmanisi and Sanjarin mark the known boundaries of humanity's first steps beyond Africa. But the deeper we dig, the more ancient the story becomes. In the red soils of Shangshan, China, researchers uncovered stone tools buried in layers dated to about 2.1 million years ago, pushing the human presence in Asia back hundreds of thousands of years earlier than once believed. At Adirampakam in India, shaped tools suggest ancient habitation between 1.5 and 1.7 million years ago. Across Arabia's shifting deserts, sites like Al-Wasta hint that humans may have crossed and recrossed the continent countless times, riding the pulses of ancient wet periods. Even on the muddy shores of England at Happisburgh, the faint tracks of human feet over 800,000 years ago tell us that the march outward did not end at Asia's edge. The old image of a single heroic migration has faded, and what remains is something grander and harder to see clearly: a long, messy scattering, generation by generation, wave after wave, an entire species learning, one painful step at a time, how to master a world too vast to ever fully know. They were not driven by conquest or guided by maps or grand designs. They moved because movement was survival, because water needed crossing, and because the horizon was always just out of reach. The same restless impulse that would one day drive caravans across deserts, ships across oceans, and rockets into empty sky had already taken root, fueled by curiosity, hunger, and hope. Essentially, long before we ever sang songs of discovery and created myths of faraway lands, Homo erectus had lived them, unbeknownst to us. With every fire they carried into the unknown, with every river crossed, and every horizon chased, they wove the first great human journey. The first migration had begun, but no journey, no matter how far, could protect against time itself. Even as Homo erectus conquered continents, the clock was already ticking. Homo erectus may not have left us a clear genetic signature, at least none that we have yet recovered. Their fossils, scattered across Africa and Eurasia, are too old, too weathered in time for DNA to survive. The molecules unraveled long ago, leaving only stone and bone behind. Yet, in a deeper sense, their genetic legacy survives, because what we carry today in our bodies, in our muscles, and in the wiring of our brains was built on the foundations they laid. We know that the genes driving modern human bipedalism, genes like Originators, which shapes limb proportions and skeletal structure, had already shaped Homo erectus. Their skeletons show a commitment to full-time terrestrial locomotion, featuring long legs, short arms, arched feet, and forward-facing toes, traits tuned for endurance running across open landscapes. We know that thermoregulation, another critical survival advantage, was likely in place. Genetic adaptations like early forms of EDR, which influenced sweat gland density and skin characteristics, would have been under selection pressures in the hot, open savannas where Homo erectus thrived. Their brains too were changing. Although we lack direct genetic samples, fossil evidence of expanded brain cases and the development of areas like Broca's region suggests that the evolutionary groundwork for modern cognition was being laid. Genes such as ASPM and MCPH1, tied to brain growth and organization, likely saw selection pressures during this era, setting the stage for the later cognitive leaps of Homo sapiens. Energy management also played a role, as the metabolic demands of a large brain and an active, mobile body would have driven genetic changes linked to mitochondrial function and endurance capacity. Even without sequencing their DNA, we can infer their biological impact, their anatomy, endurance strategies, and capacity for planning and movement all left echoes in the species that followed. We know that Homo heidelbergensis, likely a descendant of Homo erectus, carried those same adaptations into colder, harsher environments. From Homo heidelbergensis came the Neanderthals and Denisovans, who in turn contributed fragments of their genomes to modern Homo sapiens. Through morphology, behavior, and survival strategies passed across vast spans of time, Homo erectus shaped the evolutionary trajectory that led to us. When we run long distances, build shelters, or organize into cooperative groups, we are continuing behavioral patterns that first emerged over 1 million years ago. Many of the fundamental adaptations that define Homo sapiens such as our endurance-based body plan, our thermoregulation system, and our enlarged and reorganized brains, can be traced back to Homo erectus. Even without direct DNA evidence, their impact is clear through the morphology of later species, like Homo heidelbergensis, and through the survival strategies inherited and refined over generations. Homo erectus established a blueprint that shaped the course of human evolution. Their legacy is not a matter of myth but of biological continuity. They did not vanish, but laid the foundations for what came next. Homo erectus lasted for nearly 2 million years, far longer than any other human species before or since. Their success cannot be explained by constant innovation or rapid cultural revolutions. Compared to later Homo species, their toolkits evolved very slowly. However, they achieved two massive technology leaps: fire and Acheulean tools. These two technological leaps alone were evidently sufficient to take Homo erectus to places that slight innovations could not bring other hominins. They did not build cathedrals or paint the walls of caves, only simple shelters. They left no evidence of complex symbolic behavior, unlike some other contemporary or later hominins. What they achieved was stability, something rarer in evolutionary history. Over their span, Homo erectus endured some of the most volatile environmental changes the planet has seen, surviving through glacial and interglacial cycles that reshaped continents. Volcanic winters that blanketed ecosystems in ash and cut sunlight for years at a time, and droughts that emptied river systems and transformed lush grasslands and even tropical jungles into arid deserts. Every climatic shockwave called species from the earth, but Homo erectus adapted not by radically reinventing themselves, but by maintaining flexibility at their core. Their endurance came from three primary evolutionary strategies. First, ecological generalism. Unlike species that specialized in narrow niches, feeding only on certain plants or requiring specific habitats, Homo erectus maintained a broad, opportunistic diet. Isotopic analysis of their teeth suggests they consumed a wide range of foods, from meat and marrow to tubers and wild fruits, depending on availability. Their Acheulean tools allowed them to process both tough plants and large animal carcasses with efficiency, giving them access to high-calorie resources even when conditions shifted. Second, geographic mobility. Their long-distance body plan, featuring tall, narrow bodies with efficient heat regulation, enabled them to exploit a vast range of habitats, from the equatorial savannas of Africa to the temperate woodlands of Eurasia. When local ecosystems collapsed, they moved. When prey shifted routes, they followed. Homo erectus was not bound to a single environment. Their fossils stretch across more territory than any hominin before Homo sapiens, covering millions of square kilometers. Third, low technological turnover. Rather than constant innovation, Homo erectus relied on highly effective, long-lasting technological strategies. The Acheulean toolkit remained fundamentally unchanged for over 1 million years, a testament to its efficiency. Standardized, reliable, multifunctional tools reduced their dependency on specialized techniques that could fail under new conditions. This combination of generalism, mobility, and technological consistency created a species resilient to disruption, one that could persist across environmental chaos that erased many of their contemporaries. It was not superior intelligence that secured their place, but adaptability and persistence. When the world changed, Homo erectus did not resist. They moved, adjusted, and endured. In doing so, they became the longest surviving member of the human family, the first true global wanderers, and the epitome of the jack-of-all-trades, master of none. But no journey, no matter how far, could protect against time itself, even as Homo erectus conquered continents. The clock was already ticking. For nearly 2 million years, Homo erectus had endured everything the world could throw at them, but even the most successful survival strategies have limits. Their disappearance was not sudden, or the result of a single catastrophe. It was a slow, uneven process, shaped by forces that Homo erectus could neither foresee nor control. Over time, the environments they had mastered continued to shift beneath their feet. From around 800,000 years ago, the The Earth's climate, a period of increasing instability, glacial cycles became sharper, swinging more rapidly between deep freezes and intense warming. Rainfall patterns shifted, river systems collapsed, and habitats fragmented into isolated pockets, severing once connected populations from each other. Small, isolated groups are more vulnerable to extinction. With fewer individuals, genetic diversity shrinks, inbreeding rises, and local disasters like droughts, floods, or volcanic eruptions can wipe out entire lineages with no chance of recolonization. The vast, connected world that Homo erectus once navigated was breaking into smaller, harsher fragments. At the same time, new forms of humans were beginning to emerge. In Africa, Homo heidelbergensis appeared around 700,000 years ago, taller, heavier, with larger brains approaching modern human proportions. In Europe, early Neanderthals adapted to colder climates with broader bodies and advanced hunting tools. Later, Homo sapiens would follow, bringing faster technological innovation and higher social complexity. These newer Homo species were not simply stronger or smarter in every way, but they were often better adapted to local environments and more flexible in their tool use, social structures, and hunting strategies. In some regions, Homo erectus may have been pushed aside by competition. In others, they may have simply faded, unable to adapt quickly enough to the increasingly severe challenges of their changing world. Homo erectus did not just vanish. It clung to dear life for a long time, way longer than anyone in the scientific community ever expected. Their last known refuges lie far from where their story began. On the island of Java, fossils from Ngandong suggest that small populations of Homo erectus persisted until as recently as 8,000 years ago, long after they had vanished elsewhere. Trapped by rising seas and cut off from migration routes, they lingered in isolation until time itself caught up with them. No dramatic extinction event, final battle, or collapse marks their end. They simply receded as the world around them changed faster than they could. Their disappearance was not a failure, but the inevitable outcome of an evolutionary reality. Adaptation buys time, but not immortality. But what Homo erectus achieved: endurance across continents, survival across millennia, and mastery of tools and fire laid the foundations for everything that came after. Their story did not end with their bones. It carried forward in every human who would one day follow their footsteps. Homo erectus did not leave behind towering monuments, written records, or grand myths. They left something simpler and, in evolutionary terms, a lot more rare. They established the blueprint for survival as a human, a body built for distance and endurance, a mind capable of planning beyond the present, and a mastery of tools and fire that expanded the possibilities of life itself. They survived longer than any human species before or since, not because they outsmarted the world, but because they adapted to it again and again without breaking. Their innovations, simple, practical, and fundamental, shaped the evolutionary path that led to Homo heidelbergensis, to Neanderthals, to Denisovans, and finally to Homo sapiens. When we look at the shape of our hands, the structure of our feet, or the way we organize, explore, and endure, we are not looking forward. We are looking backward into a lineage that stretches 2 million years deep. Homo erectus did not vanish, they evolved. Their legacy is still moving, still adapting, and still enduring in us. Because the story of humanity is not just about beginnings, but about connections, about carrying something forward, something bigger than ourselves. If this journey through deep time sparks something in you, a question, a curiosity, or maybe even a sense of wonder, do not let it end here. Subscribe for more stories from the roots of who we are. Like the video if it helped reframe how you see our species. Share it with someone who still looks at the horizon and wonders what is beyond. Your curiosity voice and clicks help these ancient stories echo a little farther. Thanks for walking this path with us. Until next time, keep listening to the echoes.